Hey guys, today we're going to be doing an alternate history video, and this alternate history is going to be the 1964 presidential election, and it's the scenario that Nelson Rockefeller won the 1964 Republican nomination against Barry Goldwater. Now Rockefeller was seen as the liberal leader of the Republican Party. Of course, those don't exist now, but back then, there were liberals in the Republican Party. But after Goldwater's victory in the California primary, very narrow victory, he had enough delegates to win him the nomination at the GOP convention, and that was the end of it. But so this is the scenario that Rockefeller is the Republican nominee. Maybe he wins California and wins the nomination. And Johnson is the Democratic nominee. Now, Lyndon B. Johnson is the incumbent president in 1964. He became president on behalf of JFK's assassination, and of course, in the actual general election, Johnson crushed Goldwater. Goldwater only won the South, because of his opposition to the Civil Rights Bill. And Nelson Rockefeller actually supported the Civil Rights Bill, so that will definitely play a part in the South. But many voted for Johnson, but just because he was a new president and, he had potential. Many didn't think Kennedy had potential in 1960 when they elected him, but he did. So, they kind of had this remembrance of Kennedy and how no one thought that he had potential, and he did. So they did want to keep, Kennedy in office, Johnson in office, sorry. So, in the actual 1964 election, Barry Goldwater won Arizona, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia and South Carolina. That is it. He did not win anywhere else, all right? And it was awful. It was an awful showing. And he just won Arizona by less than a percentage point. So, and of course, Arizona was his home state. So, he did awful, right? And, of course, he won the South, like I said before, because of his opposition to the Civil Rights Bill. Alright, so both of these candidates, Johnson and Rockefeller, opposed the Civil Rights Bill, but without the Goldwater nomination, the South really will stay Democratic. LBJ would take his home state of Texas. I think he would take Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, all the Goldwater states, because, Rockefeller was another liberal like Johnson. He also opposed the Civil Rights Bill. I also give him South Carolina. This is going to be a very tough one, actually. If Goldwater won his home state of Arizona, and that's his home state by less than a percentage point, I see Johnson carrying it. But Rockefeller will do well in the Northeast. I think he would be able to carry his home state of New York. Of course, he was the governor of New York. These very liberal areas and traditionally Republican areas, after Nixon in 1960. That's going to help us a lot. And, after the Eisenhower years, I think Rockefeller would be able to carry Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, really. I think it would carry the entire Northeast, or this area, New England plus New York, because, these are very traditional Republican conservative areas, but also pretty liberal areas, where Rockefeller won't be seen as an extremist. In Hawaii, Johnson would have to be the victor, but in Alaska, Rockefeller would win. These two states, how they are in today's politics. Like this region down here, New Mexico, even Oklahoma, Rockefeller is not going to appeal to rural voters at all, to farmers, because he's seen as this rich city guy, he's seen as... because he comes from the wealthy Rockefeller family, from John Rockefeller back in the 1800s, who monopolized the oil industry. So this guy is a really rich guy, and farmers won't, or just normal people won't believe that he works for them. So these big business states are going to tend to go to Rockefeller more, but rural areas, agricultural areas, are going to tend to vote for Johnson. Johnson carried California pretty solidly in the actual election. I don't see Rockefeller putting up a great deal of opposition here just because this isn't a state with a lot of businesses or anything like that, a lot of factories. I think Johnson would hold on to this state. I think this would be a Johnson state. Alright, going up to Oregon and Washington for that matter, I think these would be Johnson states, just because of how much of a margin they went to in the 1964 election. This wasn't an area that Barry Goldwater did particularly well in. Sorry about that. Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas. Really, this is all Johnson territory. Rockefeller won't appeal to these voters at all. And looking back, these rural voters, I think he would be able to carry Alaska too. But as I was saying, rural voters, Rockefeller, they won't like Rockefeller one bit. I think Johnson would be able to carry Florida because there's not much business here, and business states, remember, is where Rockefeller will do well. Not much of that here. Tennessee and North Carolina would go to Johnson just because, these aren't states that particularly Rockefeller would appeal to again, and Johnson comes from the South, and he really will be the choice of voters here, not necessarily the first choice in the primary or anything. But if they had to choose one, I believe that they would choose the Democrat if both candidates are for the Civil Rights Bill of 1964. Missouri would be Johnson territory. More rural voters are that. Iowa has a lot of farmers. I think this would be a Johnson state. Illinois is a bit tough. But Illinois, I'll give to Rockefeller. This is a pretty liberal state. It was a Kennedy state in 1960, and we have to remember that Johnson is much more conservative than Kennedy, but he is still considered a liberal. Saying that there's Goldwater as a politician too. But these businesses and workers are really going to turn out for Rockefeller. I think it would be enough to carry him. Illinois, Kentucky would be a Johnson state. Because of these rural voters again. I think, there's not much business going on in Minnesota. So I think this would narrowly go to Johnson, but just because of its larger cities, I think this would be a very close state. Wisconsin, I want to give to Rockefeller, because this is a state that Goldwater did pretty well in, and I actually will give this to Rockefeller. Sure, there's not much business here, but it is of more of a Republican state and Johnson will seem pretty establishment. I don't know. I think this would be a Rockefeller state, I guess. I'll give Rockefeller Michigan. This was another state that Johnson only won by a likely margin. I know that seems a lot, but in 1964 it was not because Goldwater was the other nominee. But Michigan, but just because of its business, I think this would be a Rockefeller state, definitely with the car business, and of course this is George Romney's state, and George Romney was big with Rockefeller, as we know. Indiana, I think would go to Johnson, more of a rural state. West Virginia used to be a Democratic bloc. I would give this to Johnson. Of course, D.C. would go to Johnson. That's always been a solid Democratic district. Virginia really is considered the South, along with Maryland and basically Delaware, I guess you could give him. So I will give these states to Johnson. Pennsylvania and New Jersey, I will give to Rockefeller because these are more highly populated states with many businesses here. Business owners are going to turn out heavily for Rockefeller, and of course these border New York. Many New York the same values in these states as New York. In Ohio, I think Johnson would narrowly be able to pull out a win just because of its suburbs and how heavily they would turn out for someone like Johnson. So, LBJ wins by large margins with 353 electoral votes to Rockefeller's 185. Wasn't even close. But Rockefeller did much better than Goldwater, we have to remember. So, thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time.